It was May 1984, and the eagerly anticipated sequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark was about to be released in the form of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Fans were excited, movie screens were booked out, and popcorn was popping. However, upon its release, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom was not without its controversies. What fans were greeted with was basically less of a swashbuckling adventure and more of a swashbuckling horror movie, as they were greeted with a movie involving satanic cults, child enslavement, and gruesome sacrifices. Needless to say, some were left shocked and felt that this new Indiana Jones adventure was way too frightening for children.
It wasn't like Raiders, it wasn't as good, I don't think.
It was too gross, I just couldn't stand it.
If I were 10 years old and saw it, I would have nightmares probably for a year.
One mother and child walked out halfway through the movie.
It's too much violence and gore, mostly gore.
So why is it that so many felt that Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is a movie that its creators, Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, were out to shock and disgust its viewers? What was the lead up to this movie? And what about all its deleted material that didn't make it into the final film? Upon analysing what Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom could have been, could the movie have been less of a nightmarish shocker, or could it in fact have been worse? Well, today we are going to find out by exploring the versions of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom that you've never seen, by looking into abandoned brainstorming ideas, different scripts, and scenes that were shot for the movie but were cut out. So, let's check it out. The first indie movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark, was released in 1981 and was a massive hit, with audiences now having a thirst for more Indiana Jones adventures. So much so, even Marvel Comics still kept the character going in comic book format in order to create more adventures. Despite writer-producer George Lucas telling Steven Spielberg that he had 3 Indiana Jones stories in mind when he very first enticed his friend and co-filmmaker into bringing his swashbuckling hero onto the big screen, this actually wasn't the case, as Lucas only had one story, that of course being Raiders of the Lost Ark. So it was off to the drawing board to create a new adventure for the swashbuckling archaeologist. In those early days, some groundwork was already set for where to take the Raiders sequel. Number 1, Lucas didn't want a retread of the previous movie, and so he didn't want to use Nazis again. And 2, considering both Spielberg and Lucas were having personal issues with their real-life relationships at that time, they wanted Temple of Doom to be a darker movie, a reflection of their current moods at that time. As Lucas saw it, to give Indiana Jones the Empire Strikes Back treatment, in that The Empire Strikes Back was an emotionally darker entry in the Star Wars trilogy that raises the stakes and literally puts the characters through hell. In fact, it seemed that Lucas really wanted to move away from Raiders of the Lost Ark and to not just copy that movie. So much so, Indiana Jones himself is the only character to return, despite Spielberg wanting Marion Ravenwood to return and to explore the character of Abner Ravenwood, who was mentioned in the previous movie, but Lucas didn't go with either requests from Spielberg. One idea that Lucas toyed around with was a Lost World plot, where Indiana Jones would find himself in a lost land full of dinosaurs. This story also would have seen Jones on a motorbike chase on the Great Wall of China. Yeah, we nearly got an adventure with Indiana Jones and dinosaurs. Another possibility was to see Indiana Jones explore the legend of the Monkey King. However, both ideas were dropped when the Chinese authorities refused filming permission. Lucas then came up with a story that would have been set in a haunted castle in Scotland, with Indy taking on some supernatural ghouls. But at that time, Spielberg had just worked on the movie Poltergeist and didn't want to do another ghost story. The funny thing is, a lot of these potential ideas would go on to be recycled for possible third entries too, and would also get rejected. So who knows, maybe there's a vault out there somewhere where there are many unfilmed Indiana Jones scripts, locked away never to see the light of day. So moving forward, Lucas changed his haunted castle in Scotland to a fuggy temple in India, with the story now set in India, revolving around sacred stones, a dried up village with kidnapped children, as well as horrific sacrifices and a demonic fuggy cult. However, there was one other problem. Just like China, India refused filming as they didn't like the script and wanted to make changes as well as final cut privileges. So it was decided to keep the story in India, but instead film in Sri Lanka, as well as studio filming taking place in England. So Lawrence Kasdan, who wrote Raiders of the Lost Ark, was approached to write Temple of Doom, but he didn't want any part of it. He really didn't like Spielberg and Lucas's ideas for the sequels, saying, quote, "I just thought it was horrible. It's so mean. There's nothing pleasant about it." Further adding, the movie is very ugly and mean-spirited. Husband and wife writing team, Willard Huyck and Gloria Katz, were then hired to write the script, as they previously wrote fellow Lucasfilm American Graffiti in 1973. Now, along the way, there were several interesting ideas being thrown around. Originally, Indiana Jones's sidekicks weren't Short Round and Willie Scott, but, quote, a young virginal princess. Yeah, no one else liked that idea. There was also to be a scene involving a tiger hunt, as well as a dogfight, but more on that later. And also, those possessed by the blood of Kali were going to be actual zombies with supernatural abilities. Several action scenes that were rejected from Raiders of the Lost Ark even made it into Temple of Doom, such as Indy leaping out of an abandoned airplane and the minecart chase. It has also been stated that some one-liners that we see Indy say in the movie were one-liners that were originally written for Short Round. An early draft of the script was called Indiana Jones and the Temple of Death, and this particular script had several striking differences. The blog website, legacy.ain'titcool.com, offers a deep dive into some of these differences. For example, at the start of the movie, when Indy, Willie and Shorty escape Lauchi, they originally weren't on a cargo plane, but an actual commercial one. But while in the air, the plane was being shot at and attacked by another plane that was sent there by Lauchi. Everyone on the plane, including the cabin crew and passengers, all managed to escape with parachutes. But when it comes to Indy, Short Round and Willie, there was only one parachute left, and during a scuffle between Willie and Short Round, the parachute flies at the plane. And during the commotion, Short Round manages to get his hand on a machine gun and fires at the enemy planes, but accidentally hits their own plane. A sequence that would be recycled for Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Another deleted part of the script sees Willie attacked by a boa constrictor at their campsite. The giant snake wraps itself around Willie and is about to crush her to death, but Indy yells at Willie to pet the snake on the head, which she does, and thus calms the snake and causes it to fall asleep. This was going to be filmed, but when Spielberg saw how terrified actress Kate Capshaw was, he cancelled filming that scene. And probably just as well, it sounds a bit silly, even for this film. A scene at Bangkok Palace would have seen the Maharaja fascinated by Indiana Jones's whip, where he asks Indy to teach him how to crack it. Indy demonstrates the whip flawlessly, so Maharaja then tries to crack the whip himself, but instead he accidentally whips his own face, causing him to cut his cheek. Short Round then subsequently laughs at this, which causes a scuffle between Short Round and the Maharaja. And while all this is going on, Molaram, the main villain, shows up in the distance in the shadows. Also in this script, those who are possessed by the Kali blood are described as having glowing yellow eyes, and a possessed Indiana Jones even has smoke protruding out of his mouth. Ugh. Also, shortly before Molaram's death, on the dangling bridge, where during a scuffle with Indy, he gets affected by the burning Shankara stone, in the original script, once he was burnt, Molaram awakens from the evil nightmare of being possessed by the Kali blood, before falling to his death. And as the movie explains, fire breaks the spell of those who are possessed by the blood of Kali. Now, there are ramifications to this scene. Unlike the final film where it plays out like Molaram is the brains behind the Fuggy cult, you know, the big guy in charge, this scrapped idea plays out more like he was another victim, one who was possessed, kind of making his death less victorious and more tragic. And as legacy.ain'titcool.com puts it, if that's the case, then who was the movie's real big bad? Who was the one behind this operation? You know, the brains behind it all. Nah, look, I think it makes more sense and is narratively more satisfying to have Molaram as a man who is naturally evil who concocted this whole scheme. It just makes more sense. The first known deleted scene involves the pilots who fly Indy, Willie and Short Round out of Shanghai on board Lauchi's cargo plane. A deleted scene involves the two pilots arguing over how they are going to kill our main heroes, until deciding to abandon the plane with the three on board, and of course emptying the fuel. The next deleted scene is, in my opinion, the strangest. It involves the sequence where Indy, Short Round and Willie head to Bangkok Palace on elephants, where while riding on the elephants, Indy and Short Round decide to have a sing-along and start singing songs, which in turn annoys Willie. I don't know. To me, Indy has always been pretty badass. I don't know how I feel about him suddenly breaking out into song and singing while on his way to an adventure. In the scene where the Fuggy cult member is being sacrificed into the pit of lava, we were to see a close-up of his face being dissolved by the lava. I'm guessing this was either removed because that was considered a bit too horrific, or maybe because it was felt it was too similar to the melting Nazis in Raiders of the Lost Ark. In the scene where Indy retrieves the stones at the Fuggy shrine, he is slightly startled by the Cobra statue before tilting his hat to it. However, in a deleted alternative take, Indy is actually really freaked out by the Cobra statue, once again going back to Indy's fear of snakes, and possibly another Raiders of the Lost Ark reference. Now, one scene I wish they kept in, as I think it's kind of important, is that after being spotted by some of the thuggies, Willie actually manages to escape the temple, where she makes it back through the tunnels into her room at Bangkok Palace. She finds Chatalal, who up until that point was shown to be something of a gentleman character. Willie tells him about the temple and the Fuggy cult hidden within the depths of the palace, where shock twist, Chatalal reveals himself to be part of the cult, and members of the cult arrive to take Willie away. In the original script, when Willie returns and speaks of the cult, Captain Blumbert is also present. But the possessed Indiana Jones shows up at the palace and informs Captain Blumbert that everything is okay, and that Willie was just freaked out because of all the bugs. This whole scene of Willie being captured by Chatalal explains why suddenly he's in the next scene without any explanation. Yeah, Chatalal is just suddenly there. Another scene which I think is kind of important shows a thuggy guard who is whipping the slave children, but gets burnt by a spurt of lava coming out of the ground. This causes him to wake up from the evil spell of the cult, where he is then subsequently taken away by other members of the cult. However, Short Round saw what happened, which is why when Indy is possessed later on, Short Round knows to burn him with fire in order to break the spell. In the final film, when Indy fights Chatalal, the character gets caught by the handle of the lever which lowers people into the lava pit, and that's the last we see of him. I guess we're meant to assume that he was crushed to death. However, in a deleted scene, after saving Willie from the lava pit, Chatalal seemingly gets back up to fight Indy. Indy and Chatalal fight on the stretcher that had been used to lower human sacrifices into the lava pit, which results in Chatalal himself falling into the pit of lava. You can see a brief glimpse of his death in a DVD documentary about the movie's special effects, and holy shit, look at these miniatures of Indy, Willie and Short Round. Wow, that's terrifying! This must be from the version where our main heroes are undead zombies. Once again, another scene that I think should have been left in order to make sense is after our heroes save the slave children and unlock them from their chains, originally Indy built a makeshift bridge over the fire pit so the children can get across, which they do. However, once Indy, Willie and Short Round go to cross the bridge themselves, the bridge then gets destroyed by fire. This both explains how the children made it through the cult temple to Bangkok Palace, and why Indy and the rest of the gang then have to use the minecarts in order to make their escape. But I'm guessing it was cut because at this stage of the movie, it was heading to the climax at a swift pace. Maybe this just would have slowed everything down. So yeah, there are some pretty interesting scenes that didn't make it. Now, I think storytelling wise, Temple of Doom is pretty flawless, but if I had to pick some scenes to leave back in, then I would have left in the scene of Willie escaping only to get confronted by Chatalal, as well as Chatalal's death, and the children escaping on the bridge, provided that it could be edited at a fast pace as not to slow down the action in the climax. For the longest time, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom was kind of known as the weakest entry of an otherwise perfect trilogy. Heck, even these days there are some people out there who prefer Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and Dial of Destiny over Temple of Doom, which I honestly find baffling and makes me wonder if we're watching the same movies. Even the big man himself, Steven Spielberg, seems to have turned his back on Temple of Doom and be vocal about how he isn't really proud of it and doesn't really like it all that much. And the two Jones movies that he made afterwards really felt like they were trying to be as close as Raiders of the Lost Ark as possible. Almost as if Spielberg himself is the biggest fanboy for Raiders of the Lost Ark. Yeah, the biggest fanboy of his own movie. And I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one who has made that claim either. And thus, apart from Temple of Doom, he just can't seem to make an Indiana Jones movie without constantly referencing it or doing winks and nudges to it. But that's the thing. I love Temple of Doom because it is different. Because it's not a rehash. It's a completely different story. It tries something entirely brand new. A new direction. And to be honest, I also find it really badass. I can happily and confidently say that this is my favourite Indiana Jones movie. Yes, I know the popular choice is Raiders, but don't come at me, that's just how it is. I freaking love this movie. Yes, it's dark, and has its disturbing themes and visuals, but by the time the credits roll, you still feel uplifted and happy, and like you've been on a fantastical adventure. And yes, Temple of Doom can be pretty gruesome, but then again, so could Raiders. It makes me wonder if people who complained about the shocking content had amnesia and forgot about the melting bad guys in the previous movie, as well as that guy getting chopped up by the propeller. But in addition to all that though, for its time, within all the naysaying, there are actually tons of people who actually did praise this movie.
It wasn't that violent. It's all in fun, I think.
And none of it bothered you?
Not at all.
Really an exciting experience, and I plan on seeing it again.
It's as good as the first one, if not better.
I think it's a lot better than Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Was she scared by the movie?
No, she enjoyed it.
Were you turned off by any of it?
Nuh-uh. Nope.
I've already seen it twice.
This makes me wonder if its criticisms is more past tense or a modern popular trend, as if people have been programmed not to like it. But that's just a guess. Maybe people generally don't like it. But you know, maybe there is this idea of, well, Spielberg himself trashed it, so maybe it must be bad. And thus this idea just caught on from there. After all, Spielberg was vocal about his displeasure of the movie in the DVD documentary from the early 2000s. I think that's round about the time when the opinion changed and people did start to say, maybe it's not that good after all. But regardless, I definitely say check out Temple of Doom again, especially in this day and age where we have two pretty terrible indie movies. Hey, you may even find Temple of Doom to be a fine palate cleanser after those two movies. Just don't think of the criticisms and just go along with it. Just enjoy the adventure as it unfolds before you. And if you do that, then you probably no doubt will not be disappointed. Okay, so it could be argued that Temple of Doom is the most intense and horrific than your usual Indiana Jones movie. But that makes me love it even more. Like, this is the forbidden one. I can actually remember when I was a kid, like I think I was about 5, and the Temple of Doom was being broadcast on TV, and my parents let me stay up and actually watch it.
Harrison Ford, Tuesday, 8:30, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom on Channel 10.
And man, I loved every second of it. I absolutely fell in love with this movie. Not only that, but to me, back then, Temple of Doom felt like a really weird movie. It felt like I stepped into this dark and dangerous, surreal world, which despite the perils that our characters go through, is still lots of fun. And yes, I can live without the deleted material, as the version of the movie we've got does give Temple of Doom a fast pace. Anyway, I'm Minty, and if you truly love a movie, never let the naysayers stop you from loving it. Even if it's a movie I don't like and that you do love. Heck, even if it is Kingdom of the Crystal Skull or The Dial with the whatever it was. The love that you have for a movie is always true to you. See ya!